Living alone in the city was a badge of independence I wore with pride. My apartment, a cozy 2-bedroom in a bustling neighborhood, offered a sense of freedom I had long craved. But that freedom came with a price I hadn't anticipated. It started subtly, a flicker of a shadow at the edge of my vision when I walked home from work. The eerie feeling of being watched when I sat in the park. I shook it off as city life paranoia, telling myself I was just another face in the crowd. Why would anyone notice me? My first real alarm bell rang on a quiet Tuesday evening. Returning from a late shift, I found a note tucked under my door. It read, "I like watching you. You're not like the others." The handwriting was jagged, rushed, as if the words were an urgent confession. My heart raced. I looked around the dimly lit hallway but found no sign of anyone. The police said it was probably a prank, but they'd patrol the area more frequently just in case. Days passed without incident, and the note became a distant, albeit unsettling memory. That is, until the gifts started arriving. At first, it was a bouquet of flowers left at my doorstep, no card attached. Then, a book I had mentioned wanting to read during a phone call with my sister. The precision of these gifts, tailored so specifically to me, sent a shiver down my spine. Someone wasn't just watching me, they were listening, invading my private life with an intensity that felt suffocating. I installed a peephole camera, desperate for any clue that might reveal the identity of my unseen observer. The footage showed nothing for several nights, until one evening, the camera captured a hooded figure placing another book at my doorstep before quickly disappearing down the stairwell. The police were sympathetic but reiterated their need for more concrete evidence to take action. I felt trapped. My home was no longer a sanctuary but a stage on which I was being unwillingly observed. Determined to take matters into my own hands, I started changing my routines, varying my routes home, and avoiding the park. It seemed to work. The gifts and notes stopped, and the oppressive feeling of being watched gradually faded. Relief washed over me, allowing me to believe that perhaps the person had lost interest. That belief shattered one night when I received a text from an unknown number. "You can't hide from me." Attached was a photo of me sitting in my living room, taken from outside my window. Panic set in. This wasn't just a stalker. This was someone dangerously obsessed. I couldn't stay there, not with the feeling that eyes were constantly on me, so I made arrangements to stay with a friend until I figured out my next steps. The night before I was to leave, I double-checked all the locks and went to bed early, trying to ignore the gnawing anxiety that kept sleep at bay. Sometime after midnight, I awoke to a sound, a faint scraping, like metal against metal. My heart pounded as I lay frozen, listening intently. The sound came again, closer this time, unmistakably the sound of someone picking the lock on my front door. I reached for my phone, dialed 911, and whispered my situation to the operator, who urged me to stay on the line and hide. I crawled out of bed, my hands shaking, and slipped into the closet, pushing clothes aside to make room. The front door creaked open, and heavy footsteps entered the apartment, moving with a purposeful slowness that seemed to mock my terror. The intruder paused, and for a moment, everything was silent except for my ragged breaths and pounding heart. Then, the footsteps resumed, coming closer, stopping just outside the closet door. The tension in the air was almost palpable, the silence outside the closet door heavier than the darkness that enveloped me. My heart threatened to betray my hiding spot. Its beats so loud in my ears, I was sure the intruder could hear it. Suddenly, my phone, still clutched tightly in my hand, vibrated with a call from the police, the light from the screen piercing the darkness like a beacon. Panic surged through me as I frantically tried to silence it, but it was too late. The closet door swung open, revealing the intruder standing mere inches from me, a mask concealing their face. The moment froze, suspended in terror, until the intruder spoke, their voice chillingly calm. "You shouldn't have tried to hide." In a desperate move, I thrust the phone toward their face, using the momentary surprise to push past them and sprint toward the door. The operator's voice was a distant echo as I dropped the phone, my entire focus on escaping. The intruder recovered quickly, their footsteps thundering after me as I flung the door open and burst into the hallway, screaming for help. Neighbors began opening doors, their faces blurred by my tears and terror. The intruder halted, the presence of witnesses enough to stop their pursuit. I didn't stop running until I reached the street, the cold night air burning my lungs. The police arrived within minutes, but the intruder had vanished, leaving no trace behind except for the chaos in my apartment and the lingering fear that clung to me like a second skin. They took my statement and started an investigation, but I knew I couldn't return to that apartment. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being hunted. The following weeks were a blur of moving to a new city, starting over, and trying to outpace the trauma that nipped at my heels. I got a new job, a new apartment, and new routines that had no ties to my past. But the fear remained, a constant shadow that darkened even the brightest days. It was during this time of rebuilding that I received a letter, no return address, the handwriting unfamiliar. Inside was an apology, of sorts. The person confessed to being the one who had watched me, followed me, and broken into my apartment. They spoke of an obsession that had consumed them, an obsession they were seeking help for now. They begged for my forgiveness and promised that I would never hear from them again. The letter offered no comfort, no closure. It was just another reminder of the vulnerability that had been exposed, the privacy that had been shattered. I realized then that the physical wounds may heal, but the psychological scars would linger, a reminder of the terror I had experienced. I chose to share my story not to dwell on the past, but to serve as a warning. So, to anyone listening, let my story be a reminder. Guard your privacy, listen to your intuition, and always, always keep the light on. I never thought I'd be sharing my own horror story, but here we are. This happened to me a few years back, and I guess I just need to get it off my chest. I'm a guy, not that it matters, but maybe it'll help you picture the events better. It started off as a typical day. I was in my last year of college, juggling assignments and part-time work. Life was mundane until I noticed something odd during my walks home from the late shift. I felt like someone was following me. At first, I brushed it off as paranoia, thinking the stress was finally getting to me. But then, it became undeniable. This one night, I heard footsteps mirroring mine. When I sped up, they sped up. When I stopped, they stopped. I whipped around, but the street was empty. My heart was pounding, but I convinced myself it was just echoes or maybe a prank by someone who got a kick out of scaring me. Days passed, and the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I started noticing a car, a black sedan, often parked a block away from my apartment. It was always there, but whenever I tried to get a closer look, it would drive off. My friends thought I was overreacting. Maybe they're just waiting for someone, they'd say. But then, things escalated. I started receiving texts from an unknown number. They were simple at first. "How was your day?" Or, "You looked stressed." It freaked me out. How did this person know what I was feeling? I blocked the number, but then another would pop up with messages that were more detailed, describing what I was wearing that day, or commenting on places I had been. I went to the police, but without any concrete threats. They said their hands were tied. They suggested changing my number and routes, which I did, but the texts continued, and the car remained a constant presence. One evening, as I was locking up the cafe where I worked, I turned to find a note pinned under my windshield wiper. It read, "I just want to talk. Why are you avoiding me?" My skin crawled. This person wasn't just watching from afar anymore. They were getting bolder. I decided to confront them. I waited near my car after my shift, a baseball bat hidden behind my back. Hours passed, and just as I was about to give up, the black sedan rolled up. The driver's window lowered, and a man I'd never seen before called out my name. His voice was eerily calm. "Why are you so afraid of me? I just want to be friends." I swung the bat, smashing his side mirror. I yelled for him to leave me alone, but he just laughed, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You can't get rid of me that easily," he said before driving off. After that night, the texts became threats. "You'll regret that," one read. I was at my breaking point. I installed cameras around my apartment and bought pepper spray. I was living in constant fear. The climax came one weekend when I was supposed to be visiting my parents. I had lied to everyone, saying I was going out of town, but I stayed in, hoping to catch my stalker off guard with the help of a friend who agreed to stay over. Late into the night, we heard someone tampering with the lock. My heart was in my throat as we watched the door slowly open on the camera monitor. A figure stepped inside, cloaked in darkness. My friend called 911 as I grabbed my pepper spray. We confronted the intruder, and I sprayed him before he could fully enter. The stalker stumbled back, cursing, and in the confusion, he dropped his phone. The police arrived minutes later and apprehended him. He was indeed the man from the sedan, a guy who had been in one of my elective classes but whom I'd never spoken to. He confessed to being obsessed with me for months, thinking we had a special connection. The aftermath was a blur of court dates and restraining orders. The realization that someone had been watching, learning every intimate detail of my life without my knowledge, was suffocating. It took me a long time to feel even remotely safe again. My stalker horror story ended with my stalker behind bars, but I know I'm one of the lucky ones. This one's from a friend's perspective, but it shook our whole circle to the core. She's a female, in her mid-20s, and lived alone, which, until her ordeal, she considered a mark of independence rather than a vulnerability. It all began with a harmless friend request on social media. Emily, my friend, accepted it thinking it was a friend of a friend. The profile seemed benign enough, filled with photos of landscapes and pets. They started chatting casually, but soon, the person on the other end began asking specific questions about her daily routine, her friends, and even her preferences in food and music. Emily, being naturally open and friendly, didn't think much of it until the messages started to become more personal. "I saw you at the grocery store today. You looked lovely in blue," one message read. Emily hadn't mentioned going to the store, nor had she seen anyone she recognized. Alarm bells rang, but she chalked it up to coincidence, thinking maybe they lived nearby and had simply crossed paths. Then, gifts started arriving at her doorstep. Books she mentioned wanting to read, her favorite snacks, and once a dress in blue, the same color she had worn to the grocery store. There was never a return address, only a note signed, "Your secret admirer." Feeling uneasy, Emily tried to confront the person online, asking directly how they knew her address and why they were sending her gifts. The response was always vague. "A good detective can find out anything," they said. The turning point came one evening when Emily received a photo of herself walking home from work that day, taken from a distance. The message read, "You should smile more. You're too beautiful to look so serious." Panic set in. She reported it to the police, but without direct threats or any evidence of who was behind the account, their hands were tied. Emily became paranoid, understandably so. She changed her routines, stopped posting personal information online, and even took self-defense classes. Our group of friends banded together, making sure she was never alone for too long. The harassment seemed to cease for a while, and life returned to a semblance of normality. That was until one night, Emily heard noises coming from her backyard. Grabbing the pepper spray she now kept by her bed, she cautiously checked the window. There, in the glow of the motion-activated lights, was a figure, dressed in black, attempting to climb her fence. She called the police, who arrived in minutes to catch the intruder. He was a man Emily recognized from the comments section of her social media profile, someone who had always seemed supportive and harmless. He had been the one behind the gifts, the messages, and now the break-in attempt. He told the police he just wanted to see her in person, to explain his feelings, convinced they were meant to be together. The aftermath was a nightmare of legal issues, restraining orders, and the realization of how easily someone could invade another person's life. Emily took a break from social media, moved to a new house, and started over. The lesson here hits hard. Our digital footprints are larger than we think, and our openness online can sometimes attract the wrong kind of attention. It's a horror story that didn't end in tragedy, thankfully, but it's one that none of us will forget. It's made us all rethink the information we share and the privacy settings we often overlook.